Autumn Karcey.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So we met through Ivan.
We did?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was always intrigued because Ivan always talked very highly of you. And you're a woman in the industry, which is few and far between. Um, and can you go over how did you meet Ivan?
So I was working on a facility in Hawaii and I was flying back and forth about every other week. And I was in the Virgin Lounge at about 8 a.m. at LAX when Virgin Airlines was still around. And I looked across the bar sitting there and it was, a guy with the Jungle Boys hat and Jungle Boys shirt. And then I was working out of state for about 8 years, so I didn't really keep a beat on what was going on in California. But it was Roach, and so I was like, who is this guy? And I kind of signaled to him like, hey, and he comes over, and I was like, are you with Jungle Boys? And he's like, yeah. I was like, oh, what do you do? He's like, well, I build and design facilities, and I'm a grower, and what do you do? I had like a little cannabis leaf sticker on my laptop. And I was like, I build and design facilities and I used to be a grower. And so he's like, great, well, you should come check out our place sometime. And I was like, I would love to. So exchange numbers. And I called him. He called me back like 3 days later and was like, yeah, come down to TLC and check it out. And I was like, okay, cool. And I was just wrapping up that Hawaii job and figuring out, did I want to work in California again? And I always lived there, but I worked out of state. So I went down to TLC for a tour, and I'm in like, grow tour clothes, like backpack, and
What year was
like
this?
this was 2018, I want to say. It was right when Governor Brown just passed all the AB 243, 247. And had enacted those into law. So I knew that there was legislation coming down, whether or not Prop 64 was going to pass. Like, we were getting framework around legal cannabis in relation to grows. So I went in for a tour and walked into the conference room, and there was about 8 or 9 people there, and they were like, "Okay, you're pitching." Like pitching. Like I came here
Was
for a
Ivan in the room?
tour. Ivan was in the room. Everyone was in the room. So kind of caught me off guard.
That's heavy.
Luckily, I had my laptop there and everything. And, I kind of spelled out what I did, which is this kind of architectural design firm that does construction management. We do licensing acquisitions. And so went in for a tour and walked out with a job.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, you hit it perfectly. That was a good trip to the airport.
It was a good trip to the airport.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Roach.
Yeah, you couldn't have ran into a cooler guy.
Yeah.
Roach is a savage.
Absolutely.
How did you get started in the cannabis industry?
So I think I was like 2003. I was a young single mom trying to figure out, how I was going to raise my kid. I was newly divorced, had no money. And a group of my friends that all went to UC Berkeley kind of had these, the old school octagon hydroponics things in their garages with the old school tube lighting. And each of them had one of these octagons, and it was actually putting them through college. And they didn't have families with money. And so I was like, what is this about? I want to get into this. Started asking questions, and they were like, no, you don't want to do this. Girls do not grow. Doesn't happen. Don't know one female grower.
I know a lot of female growers, and they are always better growers than
Yeah.
men. I'm sorry.
Yeah. In 2003, there was not many. Probably in Northern California, Mendocino, but in Oakland, Bay Area, it was very dangerous.
Yeah.
So I think, in a sense, they were trying to protect me. And I, have a habit of if somebody tells me no, I kind of go full force in that direction. So my brother started growing at the same time. I begged him for about 6 months to put me on, and I think I bugged him enough. And one day he drove up to my house with a tray of, like a 52 plug train wreck clones and 6 analog ballasts, and dropped them on my doorstep and said, "Good luck."
That's awesome. You started just like us.
Yes, I think he thought I'd be out of business in 6 months.
You just crushed it.
But that didn't happen.
How do you feel about the cannabis industry back then, and then the cannabis industry we're in today?
You know, I read this book a while back. It's called Snakes in Suits, and it's written by two psychiatrists. And what they did was they took individuals that were kind of in this criminal insane asylum, and then they took individuals that ran Fortune 500 companies and were CEOs of Wall Street. And what they noticed between the two classes when they did these psychoanalysis on them is that the Wall Street guys actually scored much higher in sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies than the guys in the criminal insane asylum. And the only difference between the two classes were what side of the tracks they grew up on. And so as I go down this road, and I've been doing this for 18 years, I think, the suits have gotten nicer and the tongues have gotten sharper, but you're still dealing with the same individuals. And that's not to say that everyone that has money is bad, but it's a very important character study of driven people. And we have a lot of driven people in our industry from the legacy market. And we have a lot of driven people coming into this from the outside. So,
Yeah, they're in it for the they're in it for the wrong reasons. Just money focused. And I think that when you see these businesses that are driving just towards one financial goal, that you miss out on the team and the quality of the finished product, and where we kind of all came from and what we believe in. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that, there's a few that do really well in this industry, but I always say there's much easier ways to make money than dealing with the licensing and the banking issues. And, there's so many easier ways to make money. So I always tell somebody that's getting into this business, like, don't do it for the money. Do it because you absolutely love it and you have no other choice.
yeah, 100%. You're currently working on tax reform.
I am.
I saw the post you did yesterday on Instagram.
Yes.
Was it less taxes, more retail?
Less taxes, more retail. That's the drum that I'm beating right now.
Can you tell me what you're doing with California tax reform?
Yeah, that's the Save the California Cannabis Coalition, which is kind of a group of business owners that are working hard for tax reform. I'm working on multiple different levels of tax reform. So one thing that everybody can do that's very easy is go to Save the California Cannabis and fill out the petition and sign it. It's one click. If we get enough signatures, I think that'll create movement at the state level. And we're also working on another resolution called Resolution 21 with a group of attorneys that I work with and some other lobbyists and organizations. And what that resolution is a simple 2-page resolution that spells out that right now we're having a mass exodus of legacy growers that don't have corporate money leaving the market. And it's noticed first on a local level. So if you take this resolution to your board of supervisors or to city council, then it basically, they can vote on it. It doesn't affect their taxes at all. And it pushes on Gavin Newsom and the state legislators to lower our taxes. And so we've gotten that passed in Sonoma, Mendocino, Lake County, Monterey, Santa Cruz, Humboldt, Del Rio, Calaveras. There's a few more.
So you're passing all this on a local level right now.
On a local level. So yeah, and then if we work on San Francisco and Los Angeles, and you get all of these jurisdictions that have heavy grow communities, and their board of supervisors is going, hey, we have a problem here. Our tax revenue's down. People can't afford to pay local taxes. The market has dropped. Then I think you will enact change, and I think it's more impactful than, a bunch of business owners going, hey, we'd like to pay lower taxes, because that doesn't always,
There's only two ways that they could change the tax, would be with legislature
Mm-hmm.
and which is a 2/3 vote on legislature, and then also either a vote by the people. That's correct, right? Or
Yeah, and they at the state level they can vote to suspend it until it goes back to a vote.
okay,
Yeah.
so they can suspend it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, your team, the team that you're working with on the tax reform, who's that comprised of?
So that is Sarah Bodner with Golden State Affairs. She's fantastic. Um, she's a government relations professional and community minded. And then Joe Rogaway's law firm, and I'm working with the LCCA, which is the Lake County Cannabis Alliance. So kind of all three of those groups have come together to create this resolution to pass around to the different jurisdictions.
That's awesome that you guys are putting work into it. We're seeing it across the board. I talk to Ivan all the time, and he's having a hard time. So if he's having a hard time, other people are dying.
Yeah, and that's important. And what they're seeing is, it is a cry from small farmers because they're going out of business first. But some of the hugest companies right now in our state are failing. It is across the board. Right now,
Yeah.
cannabis is not profitable in California. And until things change, the black market is going to continue to thrive.
Do you feel that Prop 64 has helped increase the black market?
Absolutely. Exponentially.
How has it done that?
Um, by giving local municipalities the reign over whether or not to allow retail has really hurt the market. Um, and by creating so much red tape around this legislative process that somebody that's been growing for 20 years may not have the know-how to get through to get to the other side. When I first came back to California, like I passed 64 licenses for friends of mine that were, just trying to get to the other side, but didn't have the wherewithal to create the documentation needed to do so. And it varies by jurisdiction and varies at the state level, but it's a lot of compliance. It's a lot of paperwork, and it's unnecessary. I mean, I've worked with like NASA scientists that tell me it's easier to get plutonium out of Russia.
Than to get a cannabis license. I believe it. In California, I believe it for sure.
Yeah.
Environmental impact. I mean, it's nonstop.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I'm in Nevada.
Yeah.
So the last time I talked to Ivan, he was telling me for every 8,000 lights, there's one storefront in California.
I mean, he would know that statistic. I know that only 68% of the state has retail, and that's a huge problem because most of the jurisdictions voted against it. And so that's one major thing we have to change in order for this market to thrive and for patients to have access. It's so important. There's, some people that have to drive 3 cities away to get clean tested cannabis that are, suffering from cancer or epilepsy or any, numerous types of illness that cannabis heals. So, yeah, patient access is important. Retail is important.
So given that storefronts, local council has the ability to not open up storefronts. You're saying, I think before this was like 63% of California doesn't have storefronts.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
68.
68. Yeah. Okay, 68%. How do you think California can promote local council to approve storefronts? I mean, there's such a disconnect there. What do they like? What does California do?
So that's part of the Save the California Cannabis Coalition, and part of that petition is to change that in law, and so that it either makes the jurisdictions create their own process or fall back on a state process if they don't do it by a certain date.
So taking the control out of the local council
Mm-hmm.
to be able to make it a California and open up storefronts.
Well, you offer them the control, but if they don't enact it, then it defaults to the state rules and regulations.
What's the current cannabis tax by the time it hits the consumer right now in California?
It's hard to say because prices have fallen so far. And if you're talking, and that's That's one thing about the biggest tax hurdle that we face right now, and they're all hurdles. You get charged from the nursery to the grow to the distro to the retail, and then all of the local taxes in between. So
I've heard 50% by the time it hits the consumer.
yeah, I think 70 now too. And if you're talking about, $167 a pound or something like that with the new increase, um, for an outdoor crop that just hit 500, and I'm hearing even three. There's a lot of people that were tilling their whole crops into the ground this year because it wasn't profitable to cultivate. So to tax somebody the same amount, whether it's outdoor, greenhouse, or indoor, when your cogs are wildly different, like if you take outdoor, for example, and I'm just going to throw some back of the napkin numbers. I know that, there's so much variation, but if you take, outdoor at 25 to 200 a pound. If you're in smart pots, you're bringing in soil, you're on the side of the hill, you have logistical factors of getting materials in and out versus if you're on ag land with heavy equipment and, row crop style, your cogs are going to be wildly different. If you're in a greenhouse, your variations based on efficiency could be between $250, $450 a pound, depending on where that greenhouse is, what the efficiency is built in. An indoor I've seen commonly, anywhere from 500 if you're super efficient to, 9 or even 1100.
Yeah.
So it, and then, your cost when it hits the shelf is telling. So, I mean, you could say 100% for some farmers right now.
Yeah. On some of the greenhouse, there's some really large greenhouses in um, Los Alamos, Central California.
Hmm.
How are they? Isn't there a cap on 22,000? I mean, how are they going? There's like acreage of greenhouse that's cultivating cannabis. I mean, you're in licensing. Like, how are they pulling that off?
So the state was supposed to limit with Prop 64, and this is why a lot of small farmers voted for it. They were supposed to limit canopy at an acre. Then they came back
For outdoor, right?
for everything.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and then they came back and they said, last minute, okay, you can stack as many 10,000 square foot licenses as you want. So the licensing is actually unlimited here. You just stack as many tens as you want, and on the provisional side. Now they just changed that recently, but that's the way it was. And then the state measures your bed size, and then local municipalities have different, canopy caps based on population, the agricultural area that they have, and then some counties are unlimited and some counties are very restrictive. So the local municipalities can always be more restrictive than the state, but they can't be less.
So they just recently changed it. What'd they change it to?
So my understanding of the recent legislation is that any new license applying for a provisional, annuals are different, has to cannot have more than an acre on any contiguous parcels owned by the same owner. But anything that was previously in existence is okay and then has to go into an annual process. But for new license holders, you can't apply for more than an acre on any contiguous parcel with more than one owner on a provisional license. They're supposed to release a acre license once they merged everything merged into the DCC. I think that's what they're working on right now is this large cultivation license that hasn't been released yet to kind of because it's a pain to get all these 10,000 square foots and then apply for them. It's absolutely ridiculous and a lot of paperwork. So they need to merge those into, one larger license for people that have, multiple acres, and it would make the process and the pipeline a lot easier at the DCC if they're going to continue with the no cap.
Yeah. Where do you stand on that? Cap or no cap?
So, I'm indifferent. I want to find a way for small farmers to stay in business. It's one of our big fights. I also feel like, for someone like Jungle Boys, for example, they can't outsource to another grower to grow that product. So they should be allowed to grow what they need to meet their market share that they've already created based on the quality assurance, the genetics, and everything else that they've built throughout the years. So, to tell them, hey, you can only grow 10,000 square feet, like, wouldn't work.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
there's that fine line of, taking a greenhouse that's been growing poinsettias or some other flower for Home Depot,
Mm-hmm.
filling acres and acres
Yeah.
with cannabis,
Yeah.
flooding the market,
Yeah.
and then another cultivator like Jungle Boys that started in, small and slowly grew up to where they have a large demand and they need to fill that demand.
Yeah.
And they're filling a demand when the other cultivator is just cultivating cannabis.
Right. And so you shouldn't be like, okay, you have to cut back your canopy and you got to buy from this guy over here. I don't believe that that's right, but I believe that some kind of understanding and control on the market is necessary, because otherwise we're just going to flood the market and cannabis will continue to be worth less than, and this has happened in other states. Like, we have Colorado's legislation for the most part, and we saw what happened there, and it took 3 years to kind of peak, dive, and then level out again. Oregon and Washington, same thing. Anywhere where you have these kind of free, anyone can get through to the other side markets, and it's not a monopoly market like the East Coast has, you run into this problem. And in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, it kind of settles out and has like at least a baseline pricing in about 3 years. But the difference is those states have, like, 4 or 5 million people. We're 40 million people. So it's a much bigger problem to say that it's going to be resolved by any date. So yeah.
Yeah, no, we're definitely seeing it on the pricing. Um, what did you think about Newsom's budget address about a month ago, where he brought up cannabis tax reform? Do you think there's hope there?
I do. I think that he sees what's happening, and I think he has to respond to it, because it's coming from all sides, and then they're seeing it at the state tax level too. They're the ones seeing people not pull licenses the following year and not be able to pay their taxes and going into bankruptcy. So that it has to be addressed. My thought is, if it comes from the legislators, it's easier to address in a real way, than a bunch of growers getting up and crying and yelling at him,
Yeah.
which is also happening. But I think there's some very organized groups, and this is a part of, like, the industry has to work together on this. When you have a lot of these different activist groups that are fighting and different companies that want this or that, if we don't all come together, it's going to get messy and we're going to get bad policy. So, I think sticking with one group and then reading what that group is backing, because there's some bills that are coming out that don't make a lot of sense and push the taxes down the line to the retail or to the excise, and they're still getting the same amount. They're just going to lower cultivation. We need tax reform across the board, and starting with cultivation tax. So I think he will make a change.
I think he has
I
to.
just think the approach is up to us, and we have to get really organized and work together on it.
Yeah. Just real quick, a recap. What are the three main things with tax you're looking for? The three bullet points, and where do you want to see those on tax for California tax?
Less taxes, more retail, and strong working groups to come together and write policy that makes sense, that's sensible, sustainable policy, to address the state with experience instead of letting them write our policy for us. We have to draft it for them
Yeah.
because they don't understand this industry.
With pricing in California, where do you see it getting this year, and how bad is it?
I mean, it's bad. It's bad. I know a lot of farmers just sitting on their product, hoping, it's going to be worth more in a few months. I think this is the new normal. I don't think this is a recession that's just happening right now. I think that it will level out and it'll probably come back up a little bit, because unfortunately a lot of people are going to go out of business, which is going to create more of a shortage, and then prices will rise again. But Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
What pricing are you seeing in your network of people for indoor?
For indoor,
High quality indoor, what are you seeing?
oh, there's such a variation. I mean, 1100 to 2200 probably, depending on who you are and what it is.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you have a brand and a name, it's going to be worth a lot more. Branding is really important, and it's the differentiator that I think keeps businesses alive while everything levels out, because in the flood, people don't realize what's good product and what's bad product. They're just like, oh, I can get that over there for this. That's what it's worth. Not realizing that, this outdoor is better than that outdoor substantially, or this greenhouse is better than that greenhouse. So it's really the branding that becomes your differentiator of quality. And you have to have quality to back the brand, but those two have to work together.
Yeah, it's communicating to the market that this is the quality.
Absolutely.
Um, you know, I've personally seen a national price decline, even in Michigan. I mean, Mass.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a national price decline. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think like anything, it's going to come down to an agricultural product. We saw it in hemp, and like I've worked in Hawaii substantially, and they actually ship in 80% or 70% of the fruits and vegetables from South America and from other places. So, because it's cheaper to produce there, when an employee's $200 a month, you're never going to compete with that. So then they're shipping them on freighters, creating more of a carbon footprint just to bring it to Hawaii that has 4 growing seasons and probably one of the most optimal growing climates on the planet to grow fruits and vegetables. So it's definitely going in the direction of agriculture. And I think with federal legalization pending, when that comes online, then you're going to see that kind of boom and bust situation.
With federal legalization coming online, do you think that cannabis is going to be able to be sold state to state, or do you think it's going to be remain in the borders of the state?
I think that it will still become a states' rights issue, and that there's a lot of talk about that right now. And it's kind of how they treat alcohol too. Like there are certain states that are, just distribute in New Jersey, or just distribute in certain states for their liquor licenses, and they have those very locked down, especially on the East Coast or dry states. You see a lot of that. So I think the states can always be more restrictive than the federal legalization. So I don't think it'll necessarily be like open borders hemp, because you have all these different monopoly markets, especially on the East Coast. They're going to want to protect their local markets. And so I think I don't think it's just going to be a wild free for all when they come up with federal legalization. But I would worry about import export from other countries at rock bottom prices for, subpar product.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that you'd assume that there would be interstate commerce.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I think it's so complicated, and maybe 10, 15 years after federal legalization, but I mean, you never know.
Yeah, I mean, Canada did this, and it took them, you know, and they're still working on it, but it took them a while just to form the policy if we think state licensing is hard, try federal licensing. I mean, it's a nightmare. I remember in the beginning of Canada, Health Canada came out with this policy in the very beginning where, they were really trying to go medically focused and put it through the pharmacies and things like that. But they would have third party, it was proposed, they did away with it, I believe. They'd have third party auditors come to your facility and take a sample. If it didn't pass, you'd have to burn the whole room in an on site incinerator that you would legally have to put in. You'd have to put in DEA level vaults. I mean, it was just the compliance, and still is, insane in Canada. So you see that with a lot of the federal standards, which if they don't look at it as agriculture, which is what it is, and they look at it as a commercial product, that's where it can get tricky.
Yeah, I was up at I went and visited Arroyo when they first started in
Mm-hmm.
Calgary. I
Yeah.
was friends with the head cultivator. His name's Chris Mayerson,
Yeah.
and met him at Coachella. He invited me up, did a tour. But they were like, everything they had to quarantine before it came in the facility. He was
Mm-hmm.
showing me all the regulation. I was like, how do you even grow weed here?
Yeah.
This is insane. Like,
It takes the fun out of growing.
I mean, everything out of growing. It's just, I was boggled.
Yeah.
It took like 3 weeks to get a light inside the facility. Had to sit in like a garage area. It made no sense at all.
Yeah, if you want to move a piece of equipment from one end of the room to the other, you need like a stack of paperwork this big in 3 months.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Now you were talking about national importing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if there's not going to be state to state commerce, how is a state going to allow product coming in from a different country? Like,
Well, the states will decide. So if federal comes into play, I'm assuming they'll leave it up to the states to go, okay, we're, you know, Texas, we don't want huge grows here. We're going to buy everything from California, but we're going to allow retail. Or, we're on the East Coast and we can only grow indoors, but we need, some more biomass product to put into extraction methodologies or whatever, and we want to get a cheaper cog on that. They might buy sun grown from the Emerald Triangle. So it'll take a while, but I think it'll be up to the states, and each state will pop off individually based on what their needs are. But I don't think the monopoly markets will open their doors right away. It'll be the overproduction states trying to push into the states that haven't been established yet.
yeah, exactly. Do you think at that point, with federal legalization and possible importing of cannabis, Mexico would be a threat?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, because the climate there is really good. They have in some parts of it, they have somewhat of a dry climate. I worked in Colombia for about a year and a half, and with hemp, and that's a very difficult climate. It's very high humidity and very high heat. And so once you get past a certain humidity and heat point, you can't really pull that down without a multi-million-dollar greenhouse, and then at that point you're kind of at an indoor cog anyway. So why do it? So I've seen, properties with just thousands of acres of failure in Colombia. Um, Mexico, I don't think will be the same. I think it's a little drier, it's a little more temperate, and genetics will grow well there.
Labor is also really low.
That's the
Workforce
key. Yeah, that's the key.
and the workforce is hungry and hardworking. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
so yeah, I think that would be a major threat.
Although I read an article that a lot of people were pulling like indoor product across the border.
I think
Have you
right
heard
now it's
that?
happening. Yeah, right now it's happening just because cannabis
Yeah.
in the United States is so cheap, or in California especially.
Well, and good too.
Yeah,
Like I can't imagine there's a ton of indoor grows in Mexico because, but I don't know. Um, but yeah, they want like really good, like quality product
yeah.
that's indoor. So it's moving the opposite way.
One of the biggest indoor cultivators in Mexico. We have a pretty good relationship with Holy Cream.
hmm
Mike, he's good people,
Yeah.
and he grows some fire. So,
Nice.
but he's always sold out.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, it moves.
Yeah.
Where do you see the price of cannabis? Well, it's currently February right now.
hmm
Where do you see the price of cannabis at the end of this year in California?
Mm.
You see it lower or you see it leveling off?
I see it lower because as businesses get distressed, and they're not looking to next year to meet their margins, they're going to sell for below their cost of production.
So you see it getting worse before it gets better.
Yes,
But it has to
absolutely.
get better because if it doesn't get better, we can't even.
It does because the people that won't be able to afford to cultivate next year, one of two things will happen. There will be less product because there will be less cultivators, or a whole new group of people will come in and take their place and run for a while until the numbers don't make sense. So, I mean, anyone looking at a cannabis business in California, I would say run your numbers and then go, 30 to 50% below what you think
I don't even know how that's possible.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
not.
it's not possible.
It's not possible.
Yeah, we saw this in 2018. I was, I owned a hydro shop at the time and saw
Mhm.
about a 40% downturn in customers walking in the door at the hydro store
In
in
18.
18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 17 was a big year.
Yeah.
I did really well in 17.
Yep.
And 2018 came along and literally overnight, 40% down in
Wow.
sales. So it's substantial. When it hits quick.
And do you think that's because people just got out because they thought the
You know,
stakes were going to be higher, or?
I think price per pound back then, we were selling pounds for like 13 to 1500 for indoor, and that's why.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it started to creep up a little bit. And we started to get to that 22 to 22 number.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit. Everybody got an influx of cash, and then the price went crazy for a while. So it's been an interesting ride for sure. I think one of the reasons could be nationally why we're seeing the price of cannabis lower is because I think people just have less money.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of overproduction. Oklahoma, Southern Oregon, there's all these places that are growing, under the guise of hemp, and it's getting into other markets, it's flooding other markets. And at the end of the day, the country can only consume so much cannabis. I don't think it's a money thing necessarily, too. I don't think the recession has really hit us, or if it's going to, because they printed so much money during COVID. Like construction is booming right now.
Yeah.
All these other industries, real estate is booming. So I don't necessarily know it's that people have less money. I think there's just a lot more product.
So I assume that because retail store traffic is down, on the
Okay.
retail store level.
Yeah.
California wide. I don't know about nationwide, but I'm friends with
Yeah.
a few with Cookies and a few other people, and that's really the story.
Yeah. And I think the taxes have a lot to do with that. And there's a lot of, especially places like Los Angeles where, 80% of the stores are not licensed retails. And so you have stores that are
I'm not charging the tax.
not charging the tax, and then the guy's trying to play by the rules. Where's the consumer going to go at the end of the day? They just want, that extract or that brand of cannabis, and they'll go anywhere to get it if it's half price. And you can't blame them for that,
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting, and it's a little scary, but riding it out, and we'll just see how 2020, the end of 22 ends up, and 23.
Yeah.
I want to go into Cultivo and that company, because you have a long list of companies. You're like me on steroids. You got a lot going on. You're busy. With Cultivo, what's the story behind that company, and how did you start doing layouts?
So Cultivo's a design build firm. We started about roughly 8 or 9 years ago, right about the time Canada came online with their federally legalized process. I'm not exactly sure what year that was, but I was growing and had some friends go to jail, had some pretty crazy scares, and I'd been growing for 10 years, so I was just looking for something else to do in the industry, and actually quit when it hit 3,000 a pound. I was like, I'm out of here. So, closed up shop, moved up north, and was just kind of like thinking about what my next step was going to be. And I got
That was your number, 3,000 a pound.
Yeah,
You're out.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
I sound like such a jerk right now.
Yeah, spoiled. Super spoiled. We were all spoiled. I was selling packs at 55, 6.
That's what, in the beginning, yes.
Yeah.
In the beginning, I was hitting those numbers too. And then, and we were on a much smaller scale too. We didn't have 1,000 light grows didn't exist. 500 light grows didn't exist. If you had 100 lights or 200 lights, you were the biggest person in town.
Yeah.
So I, was just looking for a change and kind of wanted to get out of the industry. And I got a phone call, and we used to build grows all over Los Angeles for different dispensaries. And basically, I had a little working construction crew that would go spot to spot and just set everything up. And so I got a call from this consulting company, and they were working with Ed Rosenthal, and they were like, "We, want you to come to Canada to look at this facility, which was proposed as the largest in the world at the time." And so I went up there thinking like, well, I really want to meet Ed Rosenthal. I've read all of his books and things like that, but I have nothing to offer these people. And I enter the room, and it's, 14 of the most decorated architects and engineers in the countries that build all the hospitals and airports and everything else. And, I'm expecting to get laughed out of the room at any moment. And I start reviewing their plan sets, and they've got crazy chilling towers spec'd and just an egregious amount of money. And they do what engineers do, which is when they don't know something, over engineer it by 50%. Well, that directly affects your cogs. And so I said, give us just the HVAC piece. Let me work on that. And then I went back to my guys that I've worked with forever. And we rewrote their entire HVAC plan in like 48 hours and saved them a couple $1,000,000. And so that, I worked on that project for a while. Health Canada ultimately held it up, so it never opened. I think it changed hands. But that kind of started the path to the design build firm, and my phone started ringing from different license holders that were building things. And it was at a time where no design build firms existed around cannabis. I think we were definitely one of the first. And it was just a very interesting time. I started the company with $10,000 and no funding, and it worked.
That's awesome. It's good that you had the backbone of the garage grows to really understand, have a deeper understanding of AC and lighting and PPFD and really flow.
Yeah, they didn't understand set points. They didn't understand even the most basic fundamentals of growing. And so, through that, we realized that there was a need in the industry, and more grows were going to come online, and that you could, through the design process, really be that difference between $500 and $900 a pound, which is a huge difference. And so engineers, I love them. I work with a lot of them, but they love to over-engineer stuff, especially if it's exciting and they haven't done it before. They have a lot of ideas that they want to throw in there, and a point that they want to get to. So my job is kind of, it doesn't have to be expensive to be effective. And so sometimes you just really have to rein people in on their super creative ideas and bring it back to the basics, because, we've grown fire quality in our garages, and in with a lot less money and a lot less infrastructure. I've seen amazing product come out of trap grows, and I've seen some of the worst product come out of the nicest facilities I've ever seen. I'm sure you've seen the same thing.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
Are you guys doing just layout services?
so we do a couple different things, and it's kind of switched since COVID. I used to have a lot of everything in house. Now we sub out the architecture and the mechanical portions. And we work closely with them. We do have an in-house architect and a CAD designer, but we sub out a lot of the stamps to firms that are licensed in like 30 different states or 20 different states, so that they can go in there and put their stamp on it. And then we usually walk the process through construction management, because what I noticed was you could have a perfect plan, but once you give it to a general contractor and come back in at the end, it's a completely different story. So we kind of like to walk the process all the way through from start to finish, all the way down to the commissioning of the HVAC and irrigation and all of that.
Having permit process nationwide is not an easy task.
No.
No, that is big.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think people realize how big that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's with the meter, we just offer, with the meter designs, we just offer irrigation layout. And
Yeah.
we were looking at doing something similar to what you're doing.
Yeah.
And as soon as we started down looking at it, we're like, no, we're cool. Like,
It's a lot of work, and it's fulfilling, and it's great. It's not a definitely not a get rich quick
no, it's
kind of
not.
scenario. It's architecture and design is not that, especially for these facilities, because they change so many times throughout the process. I think what you guys do is really great because it suits that need of gives you a complete supply list, and often the people that struggle the most, like a general contractor knows how to put up walls. HVAC guy will know how to hang HVAC, but this specialized irrigation stuff, a lot of them, even the most commercial plumbers, have never seen it before. And then you don't necessarily have to have a plan through the building department, depending on what it is. If it's all above grade like this, you don't have to have a stamp and take it through and get it permit. It's above grade. Certain things like sump pumps in the ground and your water recirculation systems, anything below grade. But it's such a gift to give that to a plumber and be like, here's your exact supply list. Here's all your line lengths. Like, it's going to save that project so much time in getting that facility up and commissioned. And I don't know anyone else that's doing that right now. So,
Yeah, no, it's definitely game changing. I think we created it just by visiting many grows and seeing many bad irrigation designs
mm-hmm.
and very inefficient irrigation designs,
Yeah.
and very hard to run
Mm-hmm.
irrigation designs. And what we really do is just make designs that are easy to operate.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and that's the main thing, because you can't have your business relying on an expert to run your irrigation control. Like, you need the guy that's, pull a guy out of the trim room, give him 30 minutes and teach him how to run the irrigation. That's pretty much what Demeter does.
Yeah. No, and I remember, running down that road with Ivan in the very beginning. We were looking at every system, like Argus, Priva, like all these complicated systems. I remember going to Howelling's tomato farm in Ventura County. And it's like, multi-acre greenhouse, Venlo under glass, beautiful facility. And there was one guy in there, and they're in like 4 states, and he's like the master controls of all the irrigation. He's like, I'm running 4 states from my motherboard right now, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, that's great, but what if you get in a car accident on the way to the grow? Like, what do
No,
you do? You know what I mean? Like, you need to be able to teach people how to run this system and have redundancy and backup built in and keep it simple. Or, like, you could have that one bad day where something happens to the main guy that just knows everything,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, exactly. And when you're trying to do that on multiple facilities across multiple states, there's only so much talent,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we got to make it easy.
Yeah. Yeah. We were looking at some really complicated systems. And I remember like the guys from NetFM came in, and I like, first of all, I didn't believe the price, and then I didn't believe how simple it was. And I was like, okay, something's going to malfunction here, but it's really good components. I've used them ever since. And dosatron in some facilities, depending on how they're scaled and how many lights they have. But really just keeping that process super simple is key.
Yeah. Do you guys offer consulting services with Cultivo?
No. We used to in the past. We don't anymore. As it went through, consultants often get a really bad name in this industry. So what we did was, and the reason for that, I think, is oftentimes consultants double dip. So they'll align themselves with all the manufacturers, and they'll take incentives off the products they sell, and they'll charge the client. So they're double dipping in both ponds. And I find usually like the most highly incentivized products work, don't always work the best. And so, you know, so we don't take any money from any third party vendor or service. So I don't double dip, and I represent the client, and I charge the client a certain amount of money, and then represent their best interest, do a competitive bidding process, work through the architectural designs. And so that's different based on the level of work that we do, but the client knows that I'm not double dipping in everybody else's pocket. So it's very common in construction. It's called an owner's rep. So we're more of an owner's rep service than a consultant.
That I'm a witness to that. Yeah, I've tried many times to give you money for deals on Lux Lighting that you've turned
Haven't
me
taken
down.
it.
You're like, hey, no, we don't do that.
You can buy me a steak dinner.
Yeah. What's the difference between an owner's rep and a consultant?
Owner's rep doesn't incentivize any third-party product or service, and consultants often do.
But also
Not all the time, but
protects against the cannabis tax.
what's that?
I mean, owner's reps. It seems like what you are doing
Yes.
is you protect your
Yeah.
client
Mm-hmm.
against the cannabis taxing that often happens.
I'm the one that goes in and tries to negotiate all the products and services or find what's already existing in the regular business world without the cannabis tax. So from everything from, insulated metal panels or floor covering or whatever, you have to really do a particular bidding process because once that contractor enters your facility and sees it's a cannabis facility,
Yep.
price goes up 3x. So you really have to run those numbers and get, 5, sometimes 7 bids in any given situation to make sure that you're not paying the cultivation tax. And even firms that like we've used for a long time, like they'll kind of see the money in it and then their prices will skyrocket. Like, I love actually DPS panels because I went and priced their bids out from bids I had 3 years ago, and they're still in alignment with that like 5 or 10% increase over the years with inflation that naturally happens in the trades. But for the most part, they're very reasonable.
Yeah. Why they're one of the biggest in the industry, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the different markets that you've worked with Cultivo? Have you done national and international?
Yeah, so Colombia was under Cultivo Canada. We've probably worked in over 20 US states. So yeah, we worked, like I said, I worked out of state for 8 years, until California created a legitimate process where we could walk plans through a building department. So yeah, we've worked in all different types of environments.
What are some of the biggest challenges you see with cultivations scaling?
Usually this isn't always the case, but this is often the case. There will be an investor and there will be a cultivator, and you're trying to walk that fine line of what the cultivator needs to function efficiently and get his job done and what the investor needs for the budget and the returns. And to not make it too complicated so that if something happens to that cultivator, that somebody else can come and stand in those shoes. Like, living soil's great, but an indoor scaled 1,000 light aquaponics facility, maybe there's 3 people in the country that can run that. So you suddenly get $10 million as a cultivator and they're like, what do you need to be successful? And you get these crazy wacky ideas and you have to like kind of just bring it back to basics and go like, we need a facility that anyone can function in. Ideas are cool and we can do R&D stuff in 1 or 2 rooms, but there's certain things that just don't work when scaling. And I always say it's like trying to turn a liquor store into a Costco. Like, you wouldn't scale that the same way. It would be completely different equipment. It would be completely different rules. So trying to walk that fine line between investment capital and return on investment and what the cultivator needs to be successful and really rock out a room and do a great job.
Yeah. It's kind of like running organics in complex irrigation systems at scale indoors.
Or bringing soil into like an ISO 7 or 8 facility, like you're going to automatically void your standards. So for me, and we've done it all, like at the end of the day, I always say like, I'll give my advice, but we'll build what people ultimately want to build. And we built crazy things that I would never want to operate in. But I think the baseline standard for, if you're 500 lights or above, like, get in rock wool. I know a lot of organics guys will hate me for saying that, but I think it has its place. And I have outdoor farms also. So there I feel like organics really has a place because you're trying to create an immunity within your plants to defend against the outside environment and pests and pathogens that are naturally going to be coming in all the time. And it's much easier to, feed through irrigation systems, and we have large scale equipments and larger tubing and things like that. An indoor facility, we've seen indoor facilities that have functioned for years without a single introduction of pests or pathogens. So you don't necessarily need all the organic amendments. And if anything, you're bringing in stuff from the outside. Cocoa's an inert media, but how many times have you seen it spike to 400 or 500, especially with supply shortages, and they're pulling stuff that's not necessarily supposed to be cocoa medium into facilities? There's a lot of inconsistencies there. And more particulate matter breeds pests and pathogens.
Yeah.
It's just the baseline clean room 101 standards. So when you have, a clean room facility, an indoor facility, I just feel like you should be able to eat off the floors and it should be super clean. That means a truly inert media like rock wool, and soil, cocoa, particulate, bugs, thrips. You're going to get that introduction and you won't be able to get rid of it, not legally anyway. And that's the goal, right?
Yeah, you have less room for error.
Yeah,
less room for error with organics and organic media, a repeatability challenge, and a pathogen challenge, and it gets very difficult. I mean, you're saying 500 lights. I'd be scared to run it. Over
2.
Yeah, I was gonna say 200 lights.
Yeah.
200 lights is like it's just scary.
Yeah.
You just got so much room for error. So
yeah. It's hard enough, what
Yeah.
I mean? Growing successfully is hard enough, and there's so many different factors. So I feel like everything has its place. Again, I love living soil, and organics outdoor. It takes 3 years to build it, It takes a long time, and it takes agronomists and people with an innate understanding, or somebody that's been doing it a very long time, because you could have issues with E. coli and other things that could be very dangerous potentially with organics. So whatever you do, you just have to know what you're doing, and scaling up for the first time is not the place to try new things, or stick with the old things that don't work,
Yeah, absolutely. You also own have a company called Gene Finders Originals, right?
Yeah, so we have farms up north, and they're all under the umbrella of Alchemy 29. Gene Finder Originals is the brand that we're launching in the next 18 months. It's based mainly off of my business partner, Shord Brooks, who has been cultivating and breeding genetics for probably the better part of 30 years. And he's worked in, he's got some crazy stories. He's worked in like Africa for the governments, cultivating for them, Mexico for governments back in the 90s and things like that. So he's Dutch. So he was kind of the person they sent around to do all these like test plots for different companies at a very large scale, very early in the game. So he's an incredible wealth of knowledge when it comes to breeding and genetics. And the idea behind Gene Finders is to come up with a pathway for other breeders to license their genetics with us, and they would then get a royalty on whatever is grown and sold of those genetics, similar to how like the music industry works and things like that. So we would partner with different brands that are already in existence on collabs. We would also partner with smaller breeders that maybe nobody knows their name, but they've got incredible genetics that they've been working on for 20 years. So just trying to kind of create a pathway to work with breeders and give them credit for their work.
So Cultivo is kind of partners with Gene Finders. Cultivo is, laying it out and then separate.
Yeah.
So how are you getting those clients for Gene Finders, and is Cultivo recommending genetics to cultivators?
No, so Cultivo's just the design build portion. We do a little bit of genetic recommendation for our clients that Short helps with. And, once we build this amazing clean room type facility, how do you get clean genetics through the door, and tissue culture and seeds and things like that, so that we don't want to build these incredible facilities, and then they go down the street to their buddy that has thrips and spider mites and everything else, and then bring those into the new facility. So really just getting things fired up in a way that is not going to be problematic for the facility. But yeah, everything else is a completely separate company under Alchemy 29, which is our new baby.
Nice. Are you taking on new clients with Cultivo right now?
Not at the moment. We are. I'm a little busy. We're finishing up with the clients that we do have and finishing up some facilities. What happens is projects with Cultivo are typically anywhere from 9 months to 2 years, depending on the regulatory environment, the jurisdiction that we're working in, if it's a ground up versus a TI. So I used to take around 8 projects at a time and max out somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 square feet between those 8 projects. I'd run everything in parallel, and then I would end those projects at relatively about the same time. So it'd be these like long 2-year processes. So right now we're not taking on or starting anything new. We're just finishing our last round. I don't know if that will change in the future. It really depends on California licensing and what happens with these other businesses. But for the time being, no.
Before we move on, I have one more question to ask you about Cultivo. Do you have a percentage based on flower, veg, and dry room that you use as a formula for any facility? Is there like a percentage basis of flower versus veg?
Yeah, I'm at 30% on our veg
Okay.
typically. Whatever's and there's some scalability in that, and sometimes people are doing double stack. So there's some variables, but like my flat back of the napkin number is about 30%. And I think it's one of the huge mistakes that you probably see a lot as well, where people just underspec their veg and their dry rooms. And then you go into these facilities that are gigantic and they've got one dry room
Yeah.
or they've got, a tiny veg, and it doesn't work. So I like to allow a lot of veg space. I like room to move in my facilities because, and this is something I constantly have to work with investors on, because as they're adding numbers through their pro forma, they're like, oh, if we shrink our hallway and we shrink this up, we can add, 100 more lights.
Yeah.
See, I'm a better designer. And it's like, okay, but your employees are not going to want to work in there. And if people don't want to work in your facility, your product's going to suffer. And so I think there's something to be said for, large hallways, being able to move equipment up and down, aisleways that work depending on if someone my size is in there or you got a 6'4", 280-pound dude. So yeah, making a facility that's comfortable for your employees to work in is absolutely key, even if it costs you space.
What about cycles? For example, in some of my facilities, I'll build 1 veg, 3 flowers, and I'll come down every 3 weeks.
Yep.
And if I'm adding, or if I'm going to do an addition, I can't just build another flower because that'll mess up my veg.
Yeah.
So I'll add 3 flowers and another veg or a larger veg. And that way I'm coming down every week and a half.
Yeah.
So do you have like a cycle when you're building out these facilities like Cultivo that you try to stick with on number of flower rooms to the veg so they can run the business more as a process and a workflow?
Yeah, I think, kind of you max out at around 5 rooms or something like that per 1 veg room. And then, sometimes if you're planning a very large facility, you just want to allocate that space in veg. And a lot of ways that people build is, they'll be in flower while they're still under construction, and they'll put up pony walls and things like that.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
I don't love it, but I
I just-
understand it from a financial standpoint.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just what you have to do. And so I think that, building out your veg to the full capacity of the facility day one, just like you would your offices, is key. And then add your flower and then roll them in as you go through that process of scaling your facility. But I always say design the entire facility first, even if you're scaling.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with asking the right questions to the client, because if they have a 2-week veg versus a 3-week veg,
Mm-hmm.
the layout could be different,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yep. Yep.
because the flow is different as well.
Yeah, yeah. So we always put together like these charts of how things are going to cycle through the facilities, and we really try to build facilities from the inside out with the plant counts. And what I notice is that, yeah, but once I get in there and start operating, I always tell them those charts are going to change. You're going to get used to this facility, and it takes a year to a year and a half to really make that thing function like a well-oiled machine. So it's really just a guideline, and you can do your best with the planning process, but different genetics come in with different, like at the end of the day, it's farming.
Yeah.
It needs what it needs,
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, if you grow a Mac 1 versus,
Mm-hmm.
an OG, that Mac 1's going to take twice as long to veg
Yeah.
to the OG. So
Yeah.
there's another question, right? I mean, what
Variables.
genetic? Yeah,
Yeah.
you got so many variables that you got to pay attention to, and that only comes with experience,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I think allocating those rooms for those different varietals makes sense too. You
yeah.
have your 8, 9, or 10 week rooms depending on what you're running.
Yeah, every time I go over to Jungle Boys, always, their facilities, it's always 9 to 10 rooms with one large veg, and they're
Mm-hmm.
doing a 2-week veg.
Yeah.
And I think they have 3 stages of veg
Mm-hmm.
in each veg room. One
Yeah.
veg room, but 3 stages.
Yeah.
So they're coming down usually every week,
Mm-hmm.
depending on that. So everything is in a week process. They're cutting clones every week. They're transplanting every week. They're taking down every week, and they're
Yeah.
moving plants and cleaning rooms every week. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of breaks up the workload, which is why, in a 50,000 square foot building with 800 lights, you'll see 11 employees at
Yeah.
Jungle Boys.
Yeah. And the thing that's great about that too is that they can take down one of their rooms in like a day, maybe 2. Like take it down, clean it, flip it, you're back in again. Where if you have a 500 or 1,000 light, some of these massive facilities that have these giant rooms, I just don't know how they get it done. You've got 20 guys in there harvesting and then trying to clean that place. It's so much easier. I don't like to go above 120 lights per room, and I think my sweet spot personally is like 75.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly where Ivan's at. 64 lights a room right now, I
64.
think.
Yeah.
I think they might have up to like 72 or 78 in Florida.
64 was the standard because
Yeah.
the rooms were already built in. I think TLC was, it had like the
Yeah.
typical 40 by 40 or something. But yeah, 64 lights is a great one. 74, 75 is good. But when clients really want to push it, I'll be like, okay, 120, like no more.
Yeah,
Don't do it because
goes
you won't
in-
be able to take it down and maintenance it and replace it in a day or 2.
It's like how important Cultivo is, and understanding, because it'll make or break your business.
Mm-hmm.
With the wrong layout,
Yeah.
you've already built it, game over,
Yeah.
construction's done, and now you got to run this business based on this terrible layout.
Yeah, and the great thing about working with Ivan and those guys was that a lot of times when I've worked with big money investors, like you'll have to write 3 white papers to get a light into that facility, and you just go, "This makes sense, right?" Yeah, that makes sense. And the layouts, like, I mean, they did all their own layouts. We put it on paper because when you've been doing it so long, you just know these things, right? So you're like, no, I don't want to go above 100 lights, or I don't want to go above this because this, and this happens. Where, when you're dealing with the big money guys, it takes a lot longer to get anything done. You have to ask 12 people if you can change a thermostat. And so, yeah,
No,
that's how they're able to build so fast. Like every time you turn around, they've completed a project. That's why it's that experience behind it that is key for getting facilities up and running.
yeah, and I've watched them. They're just getting better. You
Yeah.
know, the facility layout's getting better. The irrigation design's getting better.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just improving nonstop.
Yeah,
So,
it's you
fun
could
to-
go to the bathroom and come back, and they have 3 buildings built. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
All right. So you also have a farm that you're working on in Lake County, right?
I do. Yep.
Tell us about the cultivation operation you have planned for Lake County.
So it's kind of in a bit of a shift right now, just with the way that the market is. We have 3 multi-acre farms in Lake County on 3 different properties, which is a really good growing climate. Difficult permitting process, but really good growing climate. And then we have a 67,000 square foot processing facility that's going to specialize in drying and solventless manufacturing. We're also hoping to work with other small farmers that maybe can't get through the legislative process and red tape and give them a place to grow and a place to process without having to have $10 million in capital. So, yeah, we are determining right now how much we want to grow next year, and we're probably going to start very conservative. And then we also do white labeling for other brands within our solventless processing facility.
Now, you plan on doing mixed light greenhouse, outdoor, or indoor?
Right now, we're all outdoor. I think that depending on how California stabilizes, will determine whether or not we build greenhouses here.
What challenges do you currently face with these projects?
So we want to go organic probably by year 3. So just amending the soil, getting it optimal for cultivation, getting the right genetics in a new climate. I think that the difference we always say between indoor and outdoor is that indoor you are God, and outdoors you have to deal with God. So
Yeah.
we got fires, we have climate change, we have all these other aspects that we can only at the end of the day as farmers pick the best genetics, the best nutrients, fertilizers, and amend the soil properly. So it's exciting and it's nerve wracking and it's all of those things that make this industry worth doing. But yeah, so we're gearing these farms online. It's been a tough regulatory process. I don't think the planning department of Lake was ready for the influx of the amount of applications they were going to have, and so they're understaffed. We applied, I think, in 2020, in December of 2020, and we're still going through that process. So outdoors, especially when you have to deal with CEQA, it's a lot of environmental reports and biology reports, all kinds of things that you need just to farm.
Geographically, what's the climate like in Lake County?
So it gets very hot in the summertime. It can get over 100, but your humidity is like really low, like 20-30% probably.
Mm-hmm.
We have 3 different farms and they're all very different climates. So I'm excited to see which genetics we can put at all of these different farms and how they acclimate to the environment around them. So that's going to be fun to kind of
That's going to be a
figure out.
challenge in itself.
Yeah, but I think ultimately we don't face the challenges that you have on the Central Coast with overspray of pesticide because there's no other agriculture around any of our farms. You don't face that coastal fog and moisture like Santa Cruz faces and the Central Coast faces, and even Mendocino, that's right on that coastline. So I think it's a really optimal place to grow cannabis.
You're growing in the ground, or you're growing in pots?
It depends on the permitting process. So your grading season kind of overlaps with your cultivation season. So it depends on which farms do we want to miss a season to go in the ground. We have these kind of long linear troughs from Israel that we may use for year 1 on a smaller scale until we can get our grading done to go into the ground.
So can any brand without a license, just somebody wants to create a brand, can they come to your Lake County farms and Alchemy 29, since you pretty much have a seed to sell company? Can anybody just come to you and create a brand?
I think there's some legality around that question that I'm not sure of. I think you have to have an existing licensed brand. But you can, like if you were going to cultivate under our licenses, we could onboard, employees and they could work under our umbrella potentially. But I'm not I think it's more of a legal question. I'm not sure the answer to it. If just anybody can walk in off the street and create a brand, I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, you'd assume they would be able to, given that you own the farm.
Yeah.
So you're cultivating the cannabis.
Yeah.
Then they go to Alchemy 29,
Yeah.
where they're drying it,
Mm-hmm.
you're packaging it, and you own a distribution there.
Yeah, I
So
think where it comes into play is the money going back to that individual through the track and trace process, and then you have profits basically going back to the brand. I'm not
yeah,
sure.
no, it's hard.
There's an
There
issue.
you
It's
go.
writing that
Yeah,
check like everything else up into that point, but I don't know. I'll ask
yeah.
my attorney.
There it is. It's the money.
Yeah,
It's the money problem.
yeah.
That's the hang up.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that for sure.
Yeah.
What in-house brands are you guys working with right now on launching?
Right now we're just getting our equipment up and commissioned and going through the licensing process. So we're definitely in talks with numerous different brands, but I'm not ready to announce any partnerships just yet.
With Alchemy 29, you guys are offering dry services for California cultivators. So if a cultivator has a garden in a certain region, they can transport it to your facility at Alchemy 29
Mm-hmm.
and dry it there.
Yep.
And manufacture it, extract it, package it, and you can distribute it from there at the same point.
That's correct. Yeah. So what I noticed, especially in Northern California, is everyone built out large scale cultivations with no drying space. Or the drying space that they had was in hoop houses or in barns that weren't climate controlled. And I noticed where that's a lot of where the degradation of outdoor product came from. So I thought, what if I used my background of building indoor facilities and created the same climate control that we have in our indoor facilities, but for an outdoor crop? And so we're building out about 50,000 square feet of dry facility right now. So we can actually go to the farms, either pick it up in a blast freezer and bring it back and freeze it, or we can dry it for flower product.
Is anybody doing this? I haven't seen it.
There's a couple companies on the Central Coast. Nobody in our region and nobody in Northern California that I've seen things like it, but not the amount of climate control that we're putting into it. And then there's a couple companies on the Central Coast. There's a company that we work closely with called Stacks that's doing it. And yeah, so I think it's really important, and we'll set a standard between really good quality outdoor product and something that was dried in a hoop house is obviously going to be different.
What kind of manufacturing and processing are you going to do? You're going to do, you know, BHO, rosin, where?
Solventless. So we're type 6, and we're using the Whistler equipment from Canada. And my thought is, like, if you can scale solventless, you've really done something that hasn't been done before. Like, I feel like BHO, CO2, so these things have been scaled, and there's a lot of labs all over the place. So I really wanted to specialize in one thing that we could do really, really well. So we have the Whistler machine coming from Canada, the WT2000, which is the largest solventless processing machine that I've seen that somebody hasn't built themselves out of brewery equipment, which does happen. But I think Whistler's just put together this amazing piece of equipment. There's only 2 of them in California, and I think Cresco has one, and then we're going to be getting the other. And what we're going to do with that is not, go full force and try to increase our margins, but offer the other farmers that we work with a sustainable way to process. Right now, processing facilities, have a large part in killing small farmers because they're at 70%, like, on a toll, which is crazy. So we've spent about 3.5 million in just processing equipment, and we're using that to really bring down the margins and hopefully help people stay in business.
Do you have your pricing structure between the Lake County farm and Alchemy already set out on cost to produce, or what you're charging the client for those services?
We're getting that worked out right now. We've got to do some test runs and commissioning on the equipment, and obviously there's variables when it comes to manufacturing. Farming's pretty much a set standard. We know our price per pound on farming. Typically, there's always variables and there's always bad years, but I think we can speculate pretty good on that. The manufacturing, we're just getting those margins worked out now.
Now, with Alchemy 29, how far out are you taking clients geographically in California? Is there a certain, are you taking clients from Southern California, or?
We would, and I've heard of, clients in Santa Cruz area taking their stuff all the way to Desert Hot Springs to dry it. So if it's worth it for you to bring it to us, we have our capacity, obviously 50,000 square feet. But yeah, we would take clients as far out as they needed to come, as long as it was sustainable for them to transfer.
That's awesome. That's cool. You're definitely a hustler. Cultivo, Alchemy 29, Smugglers, which is a cannabis brand that you have coming down the pipeline.
Yep.
Gene Finder's Original.
Yep.
You're savage. So
thank you.
Good job.
So are you.
we like to work hard, you
Yeah.
know, and just try to promote good business practices for the industry and help people be successful.
Absolutely.
I think that's what it's all about. Where can people go support you on the California tax? Because I really want to get behind that. I think Athena's going to get behind that. I know Ivan's going to get behind that. But as we finish, where can people go to support, to donate, and what can they do?
So if you are an operator in any jurisdiction, and you can contact me through either my website, www.cultivoinc.com, CULTIVOINC. And you can contact me directly there, and I'll get you the resolution. It's boilerplate. You fill it out with, your board of supervisors' names, and then you just give it to the board of supervisors, write a cover letter stating the urgency that the industry needs this, and get it put on the agenda at a local board of supervisors city council meeting. So you can contact me directly about that. And then www.savecaliforniacannabis.com. You can go there and sign the petition with one click. You can also donate through that site. We've done everything as a grassroots effort at this point in time. So we don't have a particular place to take donations. This was all kind of a bootstrapped initiative that we did out of need of being operators. I believe the Save the California Cannabis Coalition will formalize their structure, and then that will be a good one to back. So it's kind of in its nascent stage right now, but definitely stay tuned. The website and all of that is coming. So
really appreciate what you're doing with the California tax reform. You have a lot on your plate, and this is just adding to it, putting together the team. You're not making money from this. You're doing this for free.
Yes.
So we really appreciate, I know I can talk on behalf of the cannabis industry when I say we really appreciate you and what you're doing for the state of California on cannabis. So Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was
That's it.
great being here.
Good job.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.